Hello and welcome to my digital talk. Today I have a very special guest, a colleague and a dear friend, Professor Michaël Tanchum. Our topic for today's discussion is connectivity geopolitics of the Mediterranean and Africa. But before we start unpacking this highly interesting and complex topic, I would like to introduce Professor Michaël Tanchum. He teaches international relations and political economy of the Middle East and North Africa at Universidad de Navarra in Spain. He's also senior fellow at the Austrian Institute for European and Security Policy based in Vienna. And he has several other institutional affiliations. Professor Tanchum researches newly emerging patterns in Middle East and North African commercial connectivity, with a special emphasis on the gatekeeper nations of Morocco, Algeria, and Egypt. He analyzes the nexus of energy, strategic resources, and manufacturing value chains that connect the Middle East with Africa and Europe. Examining the partnerships of the North African nations with the European Union, China, Russia, Turkey, and the Arab Gulf states in the development of the Euro-Africa and Euro-Middle East corridors, Professor Tanchum assesses the strategic implications of the new connectivity on the evolving security architectures of the Mediterranean basin, North Africa, Sahel, the Horn of Africa, and the wider Middle East. And these are exactly the topics we want to cover in the next 60-70 minutes. So, Professor Tanchum, first I would like to start with a question that is linked to the Mediterranean scheme of four key players. Could you outline for us this connectivity geopolitics game in the Mediterranean when it comes to Egypt, Turkey, but also European powers such as France and Italy? Welcome, and the floor is yours.
Well, thank you, Velina. First of all, I'd like to say it is a great pleasure for me to be here. If you've come here because you follow me on Twitter, I advise you to pay attention to AIES. It is one of the best places for geopolitics. It's one of the best places for innovative thinking, for looking at systems, and you are seeing the spirit behind AIES in my very insightful interview of Velina Tchakarova. So thank you, Velina, and it's a pleasure to appear on your show. So as many people who follow me or read my materials know, I call the Mediterranean a game of four, because one of the things I would like to start with is that the Mediterranean basin, the entire Mediterranean basin, is a geopolitical regional system. Okay, if you study history, you know that's been true for a long time. But this body of water, people think of it as a divider when it's really a connector, and has always been a connector. So, and we're seeing that more again. So the Mediterranean itself is a system, right, that it has the 6 EU member countries, the 5 countries of North Africa, and then the countries in the Levant, so 3 different kind of regional associations, but all one system. And what's very important to understand, that this regional system that has its own regional dynamics is also an interregional connector, and that's how we're going to get to the Africa part of our talk. So what do I mean by a game of four? Well, the Mediterranean basin system that I'm talking to you about is dominated by the 4 largest countries. In order of population, that's Egypt, Turkey, France, and Italy. Now, these countries comprise over 50% of the population of the entire Eastern Mediterranean basin. They have the largest armed forces of all the countries in the Eastern Mediterranean, in the entire Mediterranean. So what we see is a macro competition between these four. Now, two of them happen to be in the Eastern Mediterranean, Turkey and Egypt. But what we've been seeing until recently, the whole thing is in flux now, is kind of a broad alignment of France and Egypt. Now, France is the third largest arms supplier to Egypt, and also France is a very close partner to Egypt's Middle East partner, the United Arab Emirates. France has a naval base in the United Arab Emirates. So, so Egypt and France close together, both kind of in opposition to Turkey since the ousting of Mohammed Morsi and the Muslim Brotherhood, short-lived Muslim Brotherhood government that was strongly backed by Turkey and President Erdogan, and the election in 2014 with President Sisi. Egypt and Turkey have been strong rivals, and there's been an alignment with France, with Egypt, and you can throw in the United Arab Emirates, and you can see that taking on a hard power aspect in Libya, where Egypt, the United Arab Emirates, and France provided military aid to one side of that conflict, and Turkey provided military aid and continues to provide military aid to the other side of that conflict. Italy, for the most part, has been kind of removed from this, but loosely aligned is a strong word, but kind of finding common cause with Turkey. And that might seem counterintuitive because everyone knows that Italy is the big operator of natural gas, both the Zohr field in Egypt and then all of Cyprus's natural gas. But the company Eni, which is under the de facto control of the Egyptian government, controls 45% of Libya's oil and natural gas. And every field, every installation except for one fell into the GNA, the Tripoli government's territory, the government that was backed by Turkey. So, for example, all of Libya's gas is sold exclusively to Italy. It's exported exclusively to Italy. 8% of Italy's gas demand, or what produces its electricity, comes from Libya. So these are a very vital interest. So, and then on the other hand, France and Italy have had their own competition. What people know is now that the UK is, and it's a little more fierce now that the UK is out of the European Union, so there's a post-Brexit element, is that what is the relationship between France, Italy, and Germany, this now the supposed engine of the EU? Because Italy has its own strategic concept called Il Mediterraneo Allargato, the wider Mediterranean. And we think of Italy as kind of an inept country because it has so many governments. But if you look over the last 20 years, they have implemented this policy quite well. I mean, Italy has 3 foreign policy baskets, a transatlantic basket, a European basket, and a Mediterranean basket. But over the past 20 years, they put almost all of their eggs in the Mediterranean basket, and it paid off big because Italy is now the second largest manufacturer in Europe, second only to Germany. Their sold production exceeds France by a third. So, and how did they do that? Because Italy focused on Mediterranean markets for 20 years. And now they see been wanting to expand that. And that's why Italy, so it's not just Libya, it's a broader program that includes Ethiopia, it includes the Sahel. So, there's a competition between these 4, but there are more players in the East Med and in the Western Med. So Greece and Israel are the big additional players in the Eastern Med, so that with the rift between Turkey and Israel and Egypt, Cyprus, Israel, Greece formation evolved, and so did an Egypt, Greece, Cyprus formation, and then these two kind of merged. And then France got involved with that, and Italy again is on both sides of this. But these are big countries that can influence the eastern end of that system. On the western end, you have Spain, of course, which has the same GDP as Russia, not to be underestimated. And you have Morocco, the great rising power on the eastern Mediterranean, that we will see more and more of. So these two countries affect this game. And now the competition between all of these countries and their alignment is affected by the next thing that you alluded to, which is Euro-Africa connectivity. So that's why this is Mediterranean and Africa. Now, I want to explain to our audience in 2 or 3 statistics why Africa is so important from the point of view of Europe, the Middle East, Asia, the rest of the world. As you and I are speaking, 42% of all young people in the world live in Africa. So if you think about next 20 years, where the labor markets are, the consumer markets are, that statistic should start to indicate it to you. But let me tell you another one. By 2025, Africa will have over 100 cities with over 1 million people each. That's why people say Africa is the new China. If you, by comparison, depending how you define Europe, at its maximum, Europe has only 15 cities. So Africa is rapidly urbanizing. There are young markets. It still has the least expensive land, natural resources, arable resources, labor markets. So in fact, China has been moving all its factories over. India has been moving factories over. So no country will be prosperous. No country will be a world power. No country will even, in my opinion, be a middle power unless it has a good relationship with Africa. And where this now comes is the trans-Mediterranean Euro-Africa connections, because in the short term, Europe is a market. So there are 3 Euro-Africa corridors. One that goes through Morocco, an Atlantic corridor from Western Africa to Western Europe, and I can talk about that. I just want to lay out the map for people. An Eastern corridor that is, the massive transshipment port in Greece at Piraeus that's run by China, combined with Egypt's massive ports, which are expanding. Also, by the way, China is the primary player in that. It creates a north-south corridor that goes all the way to the equator, to the Great Lakes region. So from East Africa to Eastern Europe. From Piraeus, you can take freight rail to Austria, to Czech Republic, to Germany and Poland. So, and then from there further on. And then a middle corridor, which is also very interesting, through the central Maghreb right now. And the gatekeeper there is Algeria. But from the Trans-African highway, the Trans-Saharan highway, you can get from Algeria all the way to Lagos. And Turkey is the one that's been, with Italy, have been pioneering the connections. I have to explain, that's a curious map. If you're interested, AIES has many on these topics. The place where Menezes' thinking was developed is through the AIES focus report. So, but that corridor also goes then through Italy's high-speed rail. So it can theoretically go from Lagos, Nigeria, 6 degrees north latitude on the equator, all the way up to Stockholm, Helsinki, because of the way the European railroads and highway systems go from 6 degrees to 60 degrees north latitude. So we're looking at massive potential movement of markets of commodities, of the way production is done. And on top of that, Africa just launched the African Continental Free Trade Association. So even though we talk about Euro-Africa connection, China is one of the most interested countries. Qatar is an interested country. The United Arab Emirates, Arabia, because it's in this system. Right now it's all in flux, how it's going to be configured. And who's in the lead and why, we can talk about in our discussion. I'll let you take it from there.
Yes, it's definitely, everything is in a kind of a geopolitical flux. We are observing so many various ad hoc, sometimes rather traditional actors constellations based on historical links or geo-economic interests, and sometimes also shared geopolitical agendas. But I would like to ask a concrete question regarding the role of the European powers and regarding concretely the role of the institutional actor, European Union. Do you see a special role for the European Union in these major connectivity corridors? How can they actually not just expand them, not just build them up, expand them, but also guarantee their security? Because we know that markets and business goals where there is security. So obviously these connectivities have a great potential, but are also facing a lot of security challenges. And it also interesting, this is an additional question that comes to my mind. Do you see also in the long term the option that once there is a north-south connectivity from Europe, now take the Mediterranean the Mediterranean area going to North Africa, do you see in the long term also the optionality for connecting the Arctic with the Central European countries, which is now the so-called 3Cs initiative, based also on connectivity with the very same corridors? Is there such option as well? Because this would be absolutely revolutionary if we look at the way how China and other powers have been actually expanding horizontally their geostrategic projects, such as the Belt and Road.
Fantastic. There's a lot on the table. What I want to say, if it wasn't clear, is there's not only the north-south connections. Where the future of the game is the south-south connections. So if we're speaking about, I'm going to try to answer your questions in order, but I want to add this element. So when you're thinking about African countries, there's the African country that has obviously its natural resources and its affordable human resource, affordable labor that's attractive. So there's one thing about, like any country, that it has comparative advantage. But then in these corridors, there's Africa as the producer with the end market as Europe. And that's right now, especially what's happening is we're seeing nearshoring. We're seeing the shortening of supply chains. And this is another reason why to reach the African markets, a different aspect of security, to reach European markets. So second is Europe as the end market. But third, with the African Continental Free Trade Agreement, is Africa as the end market, or also Middle East countries. So it's those three that are on the table, and who is going to get in. But I want to concretize, before I get to the European Union, I want to concretize what I mean. Because the bottom line is whoever creates manufacturing production, value-added production in Africa will win. That's the bottom line. If you wanted to just turn off, I don't recommend it, turn off your computer now and go home. That's the only thing you need to remember. So let me illustrate this. Morocco is a great success story. And here is because Morocco and France have built the first high-speed railroad in Africa, the Al Barak line. The first segment of that line was inaugurated 2018. It cost $2.3 billion. It's connected to the Tangier port, Tangier Med, which is on the Mediterranean, 40 kilometers east of Tangier. And Morocco has now surpassed Spain as the country with the highest port capacity on the Mediterranean. But infrastructure is not enough. This is where European Union, even China, has failed. Infrastructure is not enough. It is production. So what happens is you need the infrastructure, but you need the production, you need anchored in that infrastructure. So what you have is Renault, Europe's third largest car maker, sends 6 train loads every day of Renault cars to that Tangier Med port by that high-speed railroad. PSA, Group PSA, the second largest auto manufacturer, has now opened plant in Kenitra because of the high-speed railroad, the rail connection. So Morocco sends 700,000 cars a year to the world, mostly to Europe. 700,000 in this time period from 2014, that created 28.8% of Morocco's employment. But it's not just Renault and PSA. There are over 200 international firms located in Morocco to support that, to supply it, that creating all kinds of manufacturing. German, French, Belgian, Japanese, Sumitomo is there. Now, it's a value chain where the end market now is in Europe. But it is so powerful that China had to integrate itself into this value chain. So CITIC, CITC Diecastle, the global leader in aluminum parts, in aluminum cast parts, opened a $400 million plant in Kenitra to supply Group PSA. They can make 6 million aluminum parts. So that's because France and Morocco set up this value chain. But you see, France, gets to the European Union. The European Union did not partner with France. So for example, that Al Barak railroad, 25% of that funding came from GCC states. So Paris doesn't have a partner in Berlin or Rome. At least they haven't. So if there's no partner in Brussels, Berlin, Rome, Madrid, Athens, Paris is going to turn to Riyadh, Abu Dhabi, and Cairo. And so the agenda is going to reflect the common denominator of those 4 capitals. So the European Union, so this is a way, so that's the game. So whoever sets up these manufacturing value chains will win. And Morocco, before COVID-19, was the most advanced. I'd argue as a result of COVID-19, Egypt is the Eastern corridor is going to forge ahead. But different countries are involved in different corridors, and this is what makes it interesting. The European Union, unfortunately, European countries will be eaten individually if they don't stick together. Either they will just lose, or a country like France will just work with non-union member countries. The same with Italy. We've seen this in Italy-Turkey cooperation, where Europe. The European Commission in 2020, March, in the middle of COVID, issued its reset strategy, a new comprehensive strategy for engagement with Africa, based on a framework of 5 partnerships. Well, that's nice, but if the EU system does not coordinate, this will never happen. And that's where we look at the Mediterranean, back to the great game. there's technically the Med 7, because although Portugal doesn't have a Mediterranean coast, it's grouped as the EU South, known as the Med 7. But there are 6 major EU countries, 6 EU countries in the Mediterranean, and they are evenly split. France, Cyprus, and Greece on one side, Italy, Malta, and Spain on the other. The EU system needs to get these countries to work together and create win-win situations with the neighborhood. So France and Italy need to stop arguing with each other and work with Greece to work on this Eastern corridor and work with Egypt. Europe is failing because it has no comprehensive plan for Egypt. France and Italy are falling all over each other to outdo each other in Egypt, even though Italy, for political reasons, it tries to keep it undercover, but they're doing a lot of business there. But they should be coordinated, and it should be, if the EU had a coherent policy, then they could bring country like Turkey in as a win-win, and reset EU-Turkey relations, reset Greece-Turkey relations as well. But, Italy, during the financial crisis, Greece's financial crisis, treated Greece itself like a colony. It bought Greece's gas transmission system. It bought its railroad systems. The TAP pipeline, the Trans-Adriatic pipeline, 65% of that essential pipeline to Europe crosses Greek territory, but Greece doesn't own any part of it. Now Greece has come out of its financial doldrums. It's advancing as an innovation economy. It's leading in solar power. It's working very well with Germany on green energy transition, highly dynamic. Well, Italy now has to give Greece more parity. France has to give Italy more parity in their relationship. So this is where I see Germany playing a very important role in trying to navigate these, although Germany has its own interests. Spain could also be an interesting mediating country in terms of EU politics, although the Morocco case on the east-western corridor is different because of Spain's relation with Morocco. And Brussels, therefore, needs to take a important role, and the problem there is it's not only the public sector, it needs to be public-private partnerships to create a win-win, because I just published, everyone knows, a 32-page report on Turkey in the Central Maghreb and Africa, and we'll talk about that. I just want to introduce it. But Turkey has created production. Turkey is the largest foreign employer in Algeria. Turkey has created factories in Senegal. Turkey has created a factory in Cote d'Ivoire. Now, part of it is, you see, everybody thinks that the Chinese is going to win Africa. But we've had 50 years, at least 50 years of African independence, and Africa is still poor. So Europe hasn't worked. But whatever China has done hasn't worked. China was better. Europe came and was all about extraction, security, and extracting value. China created infrastructure, but is also extracting value. Whoever is going to win is going to create win-win relationships with African partners. I think it's great that there are so many people, because I think Africans should have choices. But Europe needs to create win-win partnerships with African partners that create production, and that's win-win in Africa, local production that participates in value chains, like we see with Morocco. Morocco has benefited tremendously from the value chain that was there. So Turkey is doing very interesting things. And it's focused in Francophone West Africa. Why? There is simmering discontent with France in West Africa. And now there is tremendous dissatisfaction with the quality of Chinese goods and what China is doing. So the field is open. So Europe has a window of opportunity. That's a big message. It's not like, first of all, one, it's not the more the merrier. Two, Europe has options, but it needs to come up with a real plan to create win-win partnerships that create manufacturing. I'll pause and let you take it. And if I don't get to the Arctic by the end, please make sure to ask me again about the Arctic.
But before we move to the Arctic, I would like to touch upon some of the other major geopolitical actors in this region. So you already elaborated on the potential and the options for European powers and the institutional actor, which is the European Union. But what about the geopolitical and geoeconomic interests of China and Russia? How do you see their role in these regions, particularly in the Mediterranean, but also in now increasingly in the not just Northern Africa, specifically when it comes to these three corridors, but also moving beyond these corridors? We know that China, but also Russia, have been filling the void and were trying to actually establish their own portfolio, be it more about economics, as in the case of China, or more about security services, as in the case of Russia. So what is your take on their role?
Yes. Okay. So again, I will repeat. I will answer all those questions, but I repeat: the ultimate winner will be the country that creates value-added production. Now, that's why the short answer: Russia will be doing a lot of things and have a big impact, but won't win because it's probably the least capable. But to give you an example, Russia is creating one value-added production. Important value-added is petrochemicals. Even if we transition to renewable energy, we need oil and gas for petrochemicals until an alternative is there. Especially since advanced thermoplastics are supposed to replace metallic parts in electric vehicles and in all kinds of things. So Russia, for example, is building a petrochemical plant in Morocco. So by doing that, and Russia has signed also a defense agreement with Morocco, although the French and U.S. defense relationship is so important, Morocco hasn't pushed it, but is keeping it as an alternative. And of course, Morocco just bought some arms from Turkey, and Morocco is interested in getting Chinese drones also. So, these countries have options. Now, so Russia is a very big footprint in what I call the Eastern Corridor. So one of the parts that Russia is a very important arms supplier to Algeria, but doesn't create much value added. But in Egypt, Russia is not only a tremendous military partner. The friendship exercise they do every year is enormous. And not only is it arms sales, but I believe it's still true that Russia can use any Egyptian airbase on 5 days' notice. Remember that Russia used the Sidi Barrani airbase, that's the closest airbase to Libya, to deploy special forces and drones and all kinds of things. There's Marsa Matruh, the big military base on the Mediterranean, and just west of that is Sidi Barrani. But Russia has also invested in Port Said, East Port Said Special Economic Zone. So that's where they're going to have more legs. Again, whoever invests and creates production. But, Russia, it has a big footprint with Wagner and security. China, if it creates production will win. So, for example, all these countries, the North African countries, are very well suited for automotive production. Morocco has, Algeria has had failed attempts. Egypt is reviving in that. So electric vehicles are the next big thing. So China has failed to set up an electric vehicle manufacturing line in Morocco so far. BYD, the company BYD, which is tremendous. So, but if they succeed, that changes the game in Morocco. In Egypt, they are producing electric vehicles. They just, with Al Nasser, everybody knows the national Egyptian car company. They revived it. There's a joint partnership. They're also producing charging stations. We're using army production. So they can create electric vehicle value chain there. That really puts them in the driver's seat. I mean, because China is building Egypt's high-speed rail north-south. Siemens, Germany has also been very effective. It's also building a high-speed monorail system. And so, but it also shows the failure of Europe, because Europe says, oh, we'll just offer regulations and higher standards. So they improve the infrastructure, but then other countries will benefit. So in terms of improving, Egypt's rail system, Thales has been there, Siemens already, but Siemens benefited. So again, China looks like it's really going to, if it creates that production in the Eastern corridor, they will succeed. And it's like, Sudan needs a lot of help. Well, why not produce components in Sudan and be part of that chain? You have the lion economies of East Africa. You can create the supply chains all the way through, especially if you think about where the resources, if you're talking about electric vehicles, think about where cobalt comes from. Think about where, lithium comes from, if you're thinking about DR Congo. So, and then the central corridor, which could change if Libya gets connected. Right now, we're talking about either going from Tunisia. Turkey's transportation system goes from Turkey to Italy to Taranto, the major port in the Mediterranean, the key strategic deep sea port, then to Tunisia, to Bizirt. But China is building Hamdaniya in Algeria, 6.5 million TEU. That could be the major port. Tunisia will be auxiliary, but that whole system could function and be Chinese. So the question is, who is going to create production in Algeria? Now, let me show you again EU failure. Algeria, as we know, has a lot of natural gas and oil, but they want to move towards renewables. So they had a program, again, like most of these countries, to shift to renewables. So Italy, the company FEMA, was chosen to lead that effort. Italy has a lot of construction in Algeria. Of course, Eni is big with extraction. So to give you an example, Eni, even though it's totally, the largest partner for Algeria in terms of oil and gas, it didn't create any petrochemical production. France, Total was the only one. And so Algeria is creating, France is helping to have Algeria have more value-added production, because pulling oil and gas out of the ground doesn't get you much money. And then Italy, again, is supposed to lead the effort, but Italy has not located any solar panel production in Algeria, solar cell production in Algeria. The only European country that has, again, is France. France did a joint venture with Sonatrach, Total. And then, for that they can then create these solar panels, not only for Algeria, but to sell to North African and Sub-Saharan African markets. Great for Algeria, great for France. But you need mounting systems for these. No European company stepped in and built mounting system production. The UAE, Key Energy, stepped in, and they built a production plant in Algeria to make mounting systems. So again, that's how it works. So China, now China does have very strong interests because there's a lot of minerals they're extracting. They've created infrastructure for that. They do have production in different countries, but like I say, it's nowhere near dominating the scene. Although now they have a pole position in Egypt and that eastern corridor. But China is increasing its military footprint in Africa to protect these interests. So like we see, it's not just the Russian army in Africa, it's Wagner and the private military companies. So one of the new things that's been happening is Chinese private military companies in Africa. Turkey, again, as I can, Turkey, for example, very smart. They produce now 2.2 million tons of steel in Algeria. Then they opened the steel plant, this Tosyala opened up a steel plant in Senegal, right? Because Turkey does a lot of construction in Africa. So now, again, they're there. But everybody needs iron. So Turkey, the same company, bought an abandoned steelworks in Angola, much further south in the western, southwest, because it has a iron ore mine. So they weren't so concerned with the steelworks. We see they're thinking strategically. They revived the iron ore mine. They're going to produce 10 million tons of iron ore a year. That services Senegal. That services Algeria. And just to get how this works, in Senegal, Turkey just built a huge furniture factory. Turkey is playing to its sectoral strengths. It's building a furniture factory. Well, all these people that are urbanizing in Africa, local markets, they need furniture. They need beds. They need couches, sleeping couches. These have been the market estimates of what they need. So, but the steel for that now can come from Senegal itself or Algeria. And Turkey opened up one of the world's largest textile factories. Turkey is a world leader in textiles, like it's a world leader in steel production. So it opened a textile factory in Algeria. Now, textiles are big business. Italy is the 5th largest textile and apparel producer in the world, makes a lot of money. So these are big business. Now, Turkey opened up textile factory, but that textile factory in Algeria can now service the furniture company in Senegal. So we don't see anything like that kind of planning. And I don't think, they necessarily have a communist 5-year plan. It's very opportunistic. There's an orientation. And then finding opportunities. But Europe doesn't have a concept. And so far, China hasn't emphasized production. They do production in some places, textile production in East Africa. But like I say, the game is open. You talk a lot about 5G. Europe invented 2G, right? It used to be called GSM, right? And it dominated the entire market. China went in and started to build 3G in Africa. So now China has 65% of the telecoms market in Africa. But now we have the transition of 5G. So who's going to be involved with that? And who's going to partner with African countries? There's a lot of And then you mentioned the issues of security. Well, Senegal decided they need digital sovereignty. They need to protect themselves, so they created a national data center, right? Not to use foreign servers. However, that national data center was built by Huawei with a loan from China. So it's very unclear if it is actually any kind of digital sovereignty at all. This is where the EU needs to be proactive, offering win-win solutions. And the only way the EU can do that is if they coordinate between countries, or I would call it coalitions of countries, of relevant countries. It doesn't have to be the whole EU. You know, and the private firms that are working and doing that are relevant for, you know, solar, hydrogen, EVs, electric batteries, wherever Europe has a comparative advantage. And this should be true of any country. But unfortunately, you know, the European Union doesn't act as a coherent organism. And, you know, so I'll let you go, jump in. Yeah.
Well, obviously, the picture that you outlined for us, specifically when it comes to the role of the European Union and the European powers, is one that is very much based on fragmentation lines. And due to the fact that these fluid constellations between various actors will further increase. There will be rising regional powers or middle powers. There will be also globally oriented actors trying also to set a foot there. So do you see the trend when it comes to the European role more in the direction of further fragmentation lines along the role of external actors based on these conflictual interests, even as you've perfectly outlined it, between the key European powers that actually set the agenda or show the direction, right? Because there is a kind of dichotomy. On the one side, we have also smaller member states, such as the case with Greece or Cyprus, that also have a saying, that also have actually witnessed a lot of tensions in the Mediterranean and are witnessing such tensions. But then again, the agenda is often being set by the big powers, by the engine forces behind the European project. So do you see that this kind of dichotomy will lead to further fragmentation? Or what is the exit out of this fragmentation? How can actually the positions of European powers such as France and Italy merge or get closer? Because obviously this kind of bifurcation in their positions also leads to further tensions, and before these tensions are not removed, there will be kind of parallel projects,
Yes.
right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yes, so you ask an excellent question, as to be expected. Always very insightful in the way you ask and frame things. Absolutely correct. So, for example, I talked about the 6 Med countries divided 3-3 in the Mediterranean. So Malta flipped, right? Malta, a tiny little country, it flipped. And why? Because it suffers big problems with illegal trafficking, not just migration, but all kinds of illicit trafficking. And if you're not aware of the country of Malta, it is where it's located, it's very close to Libya. It's close to Libya and close to Tunisia. So, who's the main security provider? Once December 19th, the GNA Tripoli Ankara Accord was activated, and then in 5 months' time, Turkey reversed the course of the Libyan war and now is in has a strong military presence at the Watia Air Force Base. That's 27 kilometers from the Tunisian border. Their naval presence in Misrata. They're training the Coast Guard. So Malta had a meeting with defense apparatus in Turkey, defense apparatus in Libya, and signed a tripartite deal for their own security interests, quite understandably. And that's when Malta pulled out of Operation Irini that was supposed to enforce the EU enforced the embargo. Well, there's a clear example of a delivery deficit of the European Union, right? Nobody is going to help Malta. And the biggest trade partners of Malta are Italy and the UK. And Italy didn't do anything. I guarantee you the UK is going to increase its role with Malta. So post-Brexit UK, if you think about Gibraltar, Malta, and Cyprus, where they're all, UK all has military positions, you're going to see UK work more, what's the UK work more with Turkey? You're going to see, so that's, again, the arrogance, of the European Union if they try to punish the UK, because if they don't work with the UK, the UK will be a powerful force, work with the US, UK will work with Morocco, and again, change dynamics. France and Italy, very interesting. If you remember, not this summer, but the previous summer, there was the Med7 conference. It was held in France, Corsica, I think. And Macron gave a big speech about Pax Mediterranea, that the EU Med countries should band together. And this is kind of what we're talking about, because the EU can't have a policy if the 6 Med countries are divided. So now that all depends about France and Italy coming to terms. And one of the interesting things you see there's been a trend over the decade of French and Italian firms merging. If you think of certain energy firms, if you, there have been production, military production, all kinds of things. So that is a positive trend. Total and Eni. So, for example, Turkey, was feeling that there was a policy of containment in the East Med. All these countries were aligned. It's NATO allies, EU partners. And in 2018, when Cyprus discovered its second well that made it a gas player, Eni found it and was sending another drill ship. And Turkey was very displeased that all of this was moving forward and feeling quite helpless. So that second drill ship faced the Turkish naval blockade. That was the beginning of Turkey's coercive diplomacy in the Eastern Mediterranean. Since then, they have sent exploration ships into Cypriot waters. Each exploration ship has a naval escort. And then ultimately, summer 2020, they upped the ante and did it in waters claimed by Greece. And that led to this big clash. But people were surprised. None of us at AIES, because we've been following this closely. But suddenly, at the height of that conflict, Egypt sent its navy to Greece to do exercises. And the United Arab Emirates concurrently sent its air force to do joint air exercises over the battle space. And people in Europe were surprised. Now, I had been writing about UAE doing joint exercises with Greece since 2017. In fact, in 2017 is when they started to do them in public and with the Israeli Air Force in Greece. So nobody should have been surprised by the North. So that goes to my point. You're asking a question as if European policymakers have knowledge. They're asleep at the wheel. A lot of them, not all of them. Certainly the heads of companies know more about what's going on, but European capitals are just waking up to a lot of this, and the European Union itself. So they have to see the strategic picture. You know, the first place I published the statistics about Morocco's port capacity was a report with AIES. And very few people in Spain knew that Morocco had surpassed Spain in port capacity, even when they read it in that report. So I think the first step is Europe policymakers in all the European capitals need to see this picture. Also policymakers in Brussels. Then they have to decide, because I talked about this Eastern corridor. Well, that goes right into the Three Seas initiative. That goes Poland. Poland really, Poland just signed an agreement with Egypt. So Poland is again, starting to wake up, not rely on things. Poland is the second largest furniture manufacturer in the world. So if Turkey can open a furniture manufacturing facility in Africa, why can't Poland? And maybe they shouldn't just wait for France for their Africa policy. So this is where I think countries that might not, I think there needs to be a much more educated and forthright discussion among European policymakers and private sector people. And private sector people who usually know a little more on what's going on the ground, this needs to be out there that Europe can talk. I think there are ways. I don't think it's. Look, Cyprus's problem is that it's not a NATO member, so it relies on the European Union for its defense, and it brought France in. France. Oh, so my point. I wanted to get back to this. So with that naval ship in 2018. Eni, to mitigate its risks, brought Total, right? Europe's third largest company, not third largest energy company, but third largest company, into partnership in all their operations in Cyprus. So, but what people don't know is at the same time, in 2018, Eni and Total also came to an understanding about operations in Algeria. So it was a broader understanding between these two companies. And that also then included Libya. So what we need to see, I think, in Europe is more of this. Again, Europeans need to understand what is going on, and then they need to understand that the only way to win is to make it win-win. So far, and whoever is going to be there at the ground floor, most African countries, the wealthiest African countries, if you're thinking of nominal GDP, like Nigeria, Ghana, Senegal, Cote d'Ivoire, just to name the ones in West Africa, they're about at the halfway point to the sweet spot where the economy takes off like China's. And you could say most of the East African countries, same way. So whoever is going to be there when these countries become what China became during the 2000s is going to be on the ground floor. And if they're there in a win-win situation, they're going to win. And I should say, it is not just Europe, Turkey, Russia, and China. GCC countries are very heavily involved. Okay, and Egypt itself is involved. So Egypt is both a gateway, but it's also an actor. Egypt is an interesting hybrid country in many regards. But for example, I talked about Turkish steel in Algeria. Well, Qatar Steel has created, Algerian Qatar Steel International, AQI, and produces. So Qatar and Turkey dominate the Algerian steel market. Tunisia, Qatar is the second largest investor in Tunisia. It leapfrogged ahead of Germany and Italy. So, and then of course Qatar is heavily involved in Libya. On the other hand, you have UAE, Saudi Arabia, heavily involved with Morocco. Even during the Qatar blockade, when Morocco's position was a little ambivalent from UAE's point of view, UAE did not drop its investments because it's so strategic. And Spain and Germany this year have woken up to the fact they can't treat Morocco as the kid at the kids' table anymore, because Morocco is such a strong rising power, and there needs to be this kind a much different strategy, and as I said, it's a European perspective. So France, Italy, Spain definitely should be working together in the Western corridor and in the Central corridor. Greece could even do interesting things in Libya, even doing things with Turkey. Why not? To reset relations in a different context. Definitely in the Eastern corridor, Greece is the country to work with. So France and Italy have to work with Greece. Germany has an important role. Netherlands is one of the most biggest exporting countries in Europe. They have an important role with all of this. So, and it boils down to vision, knowledge, vision, and leadership. And so those are the things that are not necessarily, the forces that we deal with. These are, in some sense, idiosyncratic things that depend on the actual human beings that are involved.
Mm-hmm. Maybe a final question on my side. I'm also looking at the chat room, and I see that there are a few questions. Maybe we can address one or two questions also from the chat room. But a final question on my side. I'm sorry for being too European oriented, but of course we are trying also to come up with some ideas about a pragmatic future approach by the European powers. And now I hope that this was not the signal for us to end this conversation. I very much hope that this was not the case. If that is the case, I will speed up, of course.
No, not at all. No.
Okay, but if we look at the map also, when it comes to the military footprint of external powers in Africa, you have already outlined also about the Mediterranean, and we know also that the Mediterranean has been now also witnessing an increased presence by the regional actors, the traditional ones that have been active there for ages, but now we are also observing a kind of projection of power towards Africa. So it's no longer just about the traditional external actors being present there. So you've outlined about the North Africa. Then again, when it comes to Europe, it's more or less concentrated in the western parts of Africa, and then goes along the central Sahel region. So now why I'm asking this is because we are also observing the trend of increased presence along the east coast of Africa.
Yes.
Because now there is this power shift towards the Indo-Pacific. And what I'm observing is that actually European powers are quite dispersed. They have not really an idea how to actually approach this kind of power shift. And then again, of course, regional actors such as Russia, Turkey, even China has a military presence, Japan and Gulf states have already enhanced their military footprint, and I suppose that this trend is going to increase. So do you see a need, based on your research and on your analysis and assessments, do you see actually a need for the European powers to also step in to the eastern coast of Africa in order to prepare for this power shift? In reality, it is about the security of their European trade, right? It's about securing the maritime routes. It's about securing the global choke points that actually are of great importance for the European connectivities. Or maybe I'm wrong on that. So what is your take?
Well, not at all. Not at all. We anticipated this in a report I wrote called Turkey's String of Pearls. And I have a lot of, publications coming out in the summer and through the autumn 2021 on this exact topic. Because what you're talking about, I discussed that there's overland corridor with rail connectivity all the way from the Mediterranean coast to Tanzania to the Great Lakes. But you also have the sea connectivity and then multimodal. So you have, the port was just opened in Somaliland. UAE just opened a massive port, first phase development in Somaliland, breakaway region of Somalia, independent country, which way you want to look at it. That Ethiopia is building a road, so it'll have its sea access and navy. Then you have, of course, I post these maps. You have the whole Red Sea, Gulf of Aden corridor, which is also the western part of the Indian Ocean. So China just revived Mama, that's the current president of Tanzania. The former president passed away. The former president nixed China's $10 billion deal to build a port in Tanzania because he was upset about the terms that I felt weren't favorable to Tanzania. But he was succeeded by a new leader, and she has revived this. So China will build ports. Kenya is building ports and connectivity. Europe is absent. The U.S. is there. The U.K. is there. Then Somalia. Turkey has built, its base there. Sudan, Turkey, as we know, Turkey lost the port. Russia is building a port. When you think about Russia in eastern Libya and Russia in Sudan, you could start to see a bigger picture. If you look at the maps of where Wagner is operating, you think of then Russia in the Central African Republic. If you connect eastern Libya, Central African Republic, and Sudan, you have a nice triangle there, strategic triangle. This has to do with the delivery deficit, a European delivery deficit, and a really inept approach to security. Because, again, if Europe worked with security, with win-win economic partnerships, there would be no question. So this is where, the security approach in the Sahel is a disaster. If you follow jihadi movements closely, you would know that there was something like the Islamic State of Iraq and Syria in the Sahel, northern Mali, before it was created in Iraq and Syria, right? Because there are organic connections, if you know jihadi movements, that GSPC was involved in this, and then its successor was Al-Qaeda in the Islamic Maghreb. But these ideas, all these people were mentored by Zarqawi in Afghanistan, and they wanted to do the same thing. And everything that ISIS did, was tried in parts of the Sahel and Algeria starting in the 90s. You look at GIA, even in Algeria. So this is an old story. So Opération Serval kicked out these jihadists. That's why the ISIS in West Africa didn't emerge. But what has happened since 2013 in Opération Serval? It's 8 years. And now the situation is worse than it is, and France has pulled up stakes. Because the answer is not just security. The answer is good governance and economic opportunity, jobs, functioning roads, systems, transparency. If wherever good governance recedes, that's the opportunity for jihadists. I mean, look at a country like Nigeria, blessed with such resources. Yes, it has its history and all this, but is corruption. An inept government plays a big role. Governance. You could say that's why is that, but what are the partners doing? So this is where Europe really needs to think comprehensively. Turkey, I'll give you an example. Turkey is very good at blending soft power and hard power. To his credit, President Erdogan was the first non-African leader to visit Somalia after the civil war. In the famine, 2011, the only leader to go. And Turkey blended genuine humanitarian aid with then what became hard power. They have the largest base outside of Anatolia in Somalia. In fact, they're talking now about building a space center there to launch satellites and rockets. Now you have in Libya. Then Turkey signed an agreement with Niger for military training. So Turkey does a very good job that way. And I think Europe needs to understand that it's not security. It means creating economies that are on a win-win basis that better people's lives, that people actually see an improvement to their lives. Nothing has improved. And that's why, the Sahel is, and even West Africa. We just had this meeting in Rome of the foreign ministers of the anti-ISIS coalition. And, IS, WAP, ISIS, West Africa, Islamic State, West African province, is growing in strength. You also have in Central African, DR Congo, and then Mozambique. And so when you think about the east coast of Africa, think about Somalia with Al-Shabaab that just did another attack yesterday and the day before, and then Mozambique, which is a tremendous insurgency. So right there, a country that needs a lot of help is Kenya. Tanzania could also, but I don't really see Europe thinking clearly and thinking well. And so I think one of the first things to act well is you need to think well. You need to be informed, have vision, and have leadership.
Well, I cannot but agree, of course, and yet I have to ask one question from the chat, which is also related to Europe. And I have also a final question related to the American role. What is your anticipation about the future role of United States in this particular realm in the Mediterranean and in North Africa? But the question coming from the chat is actually related to also to the future, and it asks, so the guest asks, are there any actors, parties, politicians, or whatsoever actors, take also states, in the European Union who actually understand what win-win situation means in a nutshell? And if not, if you haven't experienced that case, what would be, in your personal view, a win-win situation for Europe, how to approach these highly complex and volatile spaces in the best manner? So that would mean your personal recommendation, of course.
Right. Well, Morocco, as I say, has lessons and a success story. Now, countries like France, Spain, in Morocco particularly, have a historical baggage, but that can be overcome. Now, Macron is the first post-colonial president, but has been, in my opinion, is somewhat tone-deaf in this approach and resetting Europe, even though and Africa relations. Germany, which just apologized, and Namibia has a smaller history, not totally. But I think these countries need that. Creating jobs and value-added production is what will make the difference. Not that, when you build something in a country, every hammer and nail has to come from China. No, you need to create jobs. You need to, and this is where Turkey, if Turkey acts like China, it will also lose, because if it creates a kind of extended neo-mercantilism, why does then, and everything has to come from a Turkish company and other countries are excluded, that will mean less jobs and options for Africans. So, I mean, Morocco's production is successful because there are 200 companies, like Lear, a company most people never heard of, except it's number 157 on the Fortune 500 list. It creates air conditioning systems, seating systems, electrical systems for cars. It has 11 production sites in Morocco just to service Renault. So it's not Renault, and it's not just PS, it's Lear, employing lots of Moroccans. That's a win-win. That's what Europe has to do. There are countries that could step in. Poland doesn't have a historical baggage. Germany it can. You know, Germany is helping, doing amazing things with Greece. A German company is building electric vehicles in Greece with financing from the Netherlands. Why can't they build part of those components? Now, I would say in Egypt, but why don't they build them in Libya? Why don't they build them, you know, on the further? Sudan needs help. Greece has this interest in this corridor. Why don't you create multilateral partnerships? Let the UAE help be a minority partner in that. But that's thinking creatively. That's all in line with climate solutions that Europe wants. I think Europe needs to be enterprising. Europe needs to think about production. One of the things Europe doesn't think about a lot is production. It thinks about assets. Europeans think they're rich because they have assets. Countries are rich because they have output. Now, and that's why African countries need help creating output. That helps employ people. And then by putting this in a win-win value chain, I'm going to, with the European Council on Foreign Affairs, I'm going to publish a report on this very idea that will be out in September. So maybe we can revisit it. And I'm sure many things published through AIES, you know, have pointed to this. So I don't think it takes much. We know in our personal lives what a win-win situation looks like. We also know how it feels when we're not in a win-win situation, where somebody's taking advantage of us, or we feel helpless, or we feel no power. It's a very yucky feeling. Well, imagine that on a national level, and imagine what a difference it would make if on a national level things were changed. And it doesn't take much. It just means acting smartly and acting strategically, on a strategic scale, but smartly, and it can be done. I point to the Morocco example. I can point to other examples, also other examples in other parts of the world. You know, so all I say for young people, if you're watching this and want to learn about IR, do an internship at AIES, and you know, get a good geopolitical education, because we're really dependent on the next generation.
Which is highly apolitical, highly geopolitical generation, because they grew up, at least when it comes to, of course, the generations, the younger generations living in the West, they grew up actually post-Soviet Union collapse, post-German unification collapse. They've been actually witnessing only peaceful or extensively peaceful situation in the direct vicinity or in their country, so they are not really aware of actually the opposite of what
right. You know,
they have been living through.
You know, when I used to live in the United States, and people had a bumper sticker called "What if they had a war and nobody came?" from the Bertolt Brecht play. But that was only half the quote. He said, what if they had a war and nobody came? He said, then the war would come to you. So you can't hide from these effects. Europe's boundary is not Europe's southern coast on the Mediterranean. It used to be the Sahara Desert. It's somewhere the 19th parallel I've written about this and talked about it. So we're all interconnected. And the question is, what are the terms going to be? And who is going to be shaping those terms? I mean, people object to Turkey. Turkey is going to be an interregional power no matter what. It's just a matter of the terms that Turkey chooses. Is Turkey going to choose an inviting win-win way? Or are they going to come with a narrative that feels exclusive and oppressive to certain groups? But I would say every country faces that choice. What are the terms China is offering? What are the terms Europe is offering? And the U.S. Ironically, George W. Bush had the best Africa policy. A lot of what we've seen in the Mediterranean has to do with the retreat of the United States. And, we've heard a lot about the pivot to Asia. Well, Asia, again, U.S. needs to be looking at Africa. I have a lot to say about East Africa as part of the Indian Ocean system, which I'll be writing about. But this is where the transatlantic partnership needs to work. And take a case like Kenya, which I'm writing about, the transatlantic partnership in Kenya. Kenya has Mozambique jihadism to the south. Kenya has Al-Shabaab to the north. It is the third, strongest economy in sub-Saharan Africa. There's a great place to make a difference. It's still got probably one of the most free presses. And that would be a great place to make a difference. You could pick a lot of countries. A lot of countries are in need. But again, the answer is production, value-added, win-win. And if nobody does it, then, Africans and other people are going to suffer. And we're just going to have, what we have now. But there are answers. There are ways out. There are ways to a better world and cooperation and prosperity that benefits more people than it does now.
And I think this is a great way how to end this conversation, with a grain of hope instead of a grain of pessimism. And I certainly reserve myself the opportunity to invite you once again, Professor Tanchum, to discuss the upcoming publications of yours, probably in the second half of the year. And I very much hope that our political decision makers on that side of the Atlantic, but of course together with other like-minded partners, will elaborate on some of these ideas for the future, and will seek these win-win approaches in their geopolitical and geoeconomic portfolio. Thank you very much for being with us, for staying so long.
Thank you, Velina. You are a fantastic hostess with excellent questions and excellent listening. And the world could use a lot more listening. So I thank you for being such a great hostess, and I congratulate you on the success of your digital talks. And it would be my pleasure to come back whenever you invite me.
And in the meantime, for our audience and for those who will be listening post live stream, you can find Professor Tanchum on social media. He is very active on Twitter at Michaël Tanchum. You can find his publications partially on the webpage of the AIES, but you can also find all of his publications on social media. So he's also publishing for various European and American and international think tanks and institutes. So feel free to contact him also on social media if you want to explore more about his research and his publications. Thank you very much, Professor Tanchum.
Thank you.